Matt Yasa here. I'll be attempting to do some glass blowing using Jolly Ranchers. Will it be a sweet success or a sticky mess? I'll start off by scoring this rod and giving it a quick snap. And now the end is still a little bit sharp, so I'm going to polish it with the flame. That way I don't cut my lip when I blow into it. And now the other end is going to attach up to the Jolly Rancher. Ooh, wow, it's still pretty hot. And so I'll be using my glass blowing equipment today, especially the torch, which runs very hot. I normally melt Borosilicate, which is laboratory glass. This being made of sugar is going to require a lot less heat, so it's moving around very quickly here. It looks like the outside is very gooey, but the inside is still solid. I'm going to have to work very slowly and gently try to push heat into it. I also need to keep rotating it or it'll slide right off my blow tube. I'm trying to puff into it, but it's still not molten all the way through. I'm going to have to give it some more heat. Oh, a little bit too much there, and it starts dripping off on me. Oh no. This is actually pretty hard, especially using the torch. The glass I normally use requires over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, where this candy to melt would require a little bit less than 300 degrees, so it's quite a difference. But besides that, scientifically speaking, they're very similar. They're both what they call amorphous solids. The molecules don't arrange themselves in a very particular order. They're kind of more free-flowing. I like to compare it to kind of a box of building blocks, a bunch of Legos of all different colors. You can take the time to put all the Lego blocks together and end up with a variety of different color patterns and shapes. But then on the other hand, the crystalline solids, it's more like a puzzle. Only when arranged in a very specific manner, a very specific shape, can you interpret the image. And so I'm trying to figure out the puzzle here of candy glass blowing. It definitely seems like you have to work slow. Normally, when I blow out a sphere of glass, I'll heat it up in the flame to a molten state, remove it out of the flame for only 5, maybe 10 seconds, and then blow into it. And then after another 5 or 10 seconds, it's pretty much a solid globe. And now for this candy, I'm pulling it out of the flame and letting it cool for almost 5 minutes. And of course, being candy, I have to try it. And it's not bad. It tastes like you'd expect, Jolly Rancher. And now the texture of it is a little bit strange. It was pulled out like glass, so it has that feeling of a little sheet of glass in your mouth. But then it begins to dissolve down pretty quickly because it's sugar. And so I'll go ahead and use my Jax tool to flare the end open like a funnel and pick up 2 Jolly Ranchers at once. This technique is very similar to the solid color blowout. For that technique, I like to thicken the tube up and flare it so that it'll hold more heat. And now for this here, I'm just going to flare it for more surface area. That way I can hold on to more candy. I've also been using my fingers and hands quite a bit to mold the candy, which is kind of weird. I'm not used to touching the glass like that. But I've been using some of my glass tools also, like the graphite, so I don't really plan to eat this too much. But I am having a fun time with this candy. It's quite different. I end up putting a bit too much heat into it and it starts to bubble. I also have to spin it a little bit faster as it's starting to drip off here. But now since it stays molten for a super long time, I'll go ahead and hold it up and you'll see how it flattens out into more of a pancake. But then if I invert it down, it'll start to pull out into a cone. And then holding it sideways, kind of the middle of those two directions, will make a sphere. And that's how you do your shaping using gravity. And so I'm trying to blow this sphere out some more, and I accidentally pop out the end of it. So I'll go in with my jacks, ream the end open, and make a tube. And so I had to figure out a way to get this off the tube. I thought the best method might be to heat the tubing up a couple inches down, let the heat radiate up into that section, and pull it right off. And so I think that one turned out a bit better than the first one. I think having more candy to work with helps a little bit, so this time I'll try 4 Jolly Ranchers. I'll heat up the first 2 into a nice molten state and go down to pick up the other 2. And the reason I've been using green so far is just because I had a lot of extra green apple. I'm going to pull out some different colors in a minute here. But I'm going to have to shape it with my graphite a little bit since I'm having trouble shaping it with the heat. And I'll start giving it little puffs and rotating it back and forth. You can puff it out more slowly. You don't have to do it all in one breath. And then I'll go ahead and flatten the bottom a little bit so it stands upright. Going to be a little jar. And then I'll heat up the tube a couple inches up and pull it off again. This method seems like it's been working. And so something pretty interesting happened with this jar. Normally when I'm done with a glass project, I'll put it in the kiln, not only to anneal it, but to help it cool down more slowly. And so I figured I would put that green jar into the freezer. I thought that might help it set up a little more solid, kind of like a reverse kiln. But then when I came back a little bit later, I ended up finding 2 very deep cracks in it. So I pulled it out of the freezer, put it down on the counter. I was planning to just throw it away. I was kind of upset that it broke. But I came back a little while later, and to my surprise, the cracks were gone. And so as I said before, it's very similar to glass. And I think with that lower melting point at room temperature, it must sit near that softening point where glass would be at near 1,000 degrees. And now I have made candy before, a little bit of hard candy and a little bit of taffy. This is hard candy, but I feel it's a little bit on the softer side, like a little bit of a lower melting point. I just remember the hard candy I made was hard and sharp like glass. It wasn't very fun at all to eat. But it's basically made by boiling some sugar in water up to a high enough temperature. I won't get too much into candy making. This episode is more focused on candy blowing. But if you're looking to blow some Jolly Ranchers at home for fun, there's probably a few ways to get it done. One would probably be the heat gun. I've never used one myself, but it seems like it'd be suitable. A lower powered one that you can mount to a desk or table would be extra safe. Real quick here, I'm having some trouble blowing out this sphere. I've noticed some of that blue raspberry has worked its way up the tube. I'll have to heat the tubing up a couple inches down, but I should get that blue raspberry molten again. Now I'll start to blow out all 3 colors at once. I gotta go a little bit slow so I don't over thin out the wall and it'll pop. And I kind of blew it out there a bit thin. I'll have to go back in the flame and melt that area back down so it'll thicken up, which is kind of difficult to do with the torch. Normally with glass, I would not only melt that area back, but melt the entire thing down, kind of contract it down in size a little bit, and then blow it out larger again. And so instead of doing any of that, I'll just kind of rotate it around in the air for several minutes, and hopefully it's molten enough that that stuff will happen. So this might give you a little bit of experience at home to what glass blowing is like, but if you're looking for the full experience, you're definitely going to want the torch, which technically is lampworking. The other more traditional method would be to use a large furnace and heat the entire glass all at once, like an oven. But that's a little bit harder to set up at home. So the torch is definitely a great way to get started, but you really need to do your research. You'll fully understand what you're doing before you jump into it. The higher temperatures and flammable gases definitely make it more of a cautionary activity. But that's why it's important to practice not only the proper techniques and methods used to melt glass, but the safety tips as well. And so the Jolly Rancher jar is cool to the touch. I'm just trying to melt that connection between it and the tube. Which reminds me of a good question I had from a subscriber recently. Do the blow tubes or punties ever become too hot to handle? Or does it dissipate all the heat before it reaches my hand? And yes, it does pretty much dissipate all the heat. Your blow tubes and punties should always be cool to the touch. And so here's my first attempt. It didn't turn out very well, but the second one was kind of a cool tube. And this jar was made from 4 Jolly Ranchers. And then finally the red, blue, and green jar. This was made from 6 Jolly Ranchers. You can see the inside is pretty deep. It does hold a few Jolly Ranchers itself. But now we have reached the end of the video. I had a lot of fun making this one. It was definitely a new experience trying to blow out candy, but that's really the best way to learn. Instead of just sticking what I'm good at, I like to try new things, figure out what I'm bad at, and keep working at it until I'm good. So make sure to join me on this glass journey, practice yourself for the next episode, and I'll see you next time on the Matt Jasa channel.